My name is Gerald, not Victoria, though that's what my birth certificate says, not Tori, though that's what my family called me when they wanted to remind me of the person they expected me to become. Gerald. A name I chose for myself at 24 after 3 years of saving every dollar from double shifts at a diner, after finally understanding that the person they saw when they looked at me was a ghost of their own creation, a projection of their fears, their disappointments, their unlived lives. The most important thing you need to know about me before any of this makes sense is that I spent 28 years believing my family's opinion of me was the same thing as the truth. I spent 28 years measuring my worth by their approval, adjusting my dreams to fit their expectations, apologizing for ambitions they found embarrassing. I spent 28 years trying to earn a place at a table that was never actually set for me. It took one envelope to prove otherwise. But that envelope slid across polished oak on Christmas Eve wasn't really the beginning, it was the end. The final punctuation mark on a sentence that had been writing itself since I was old enough to understand that love in my family came with conditions attached. That acceptance was a currency that had to be earned, that I was somehow, inexplicably, overdrawn from the moment I drew my first breath. This is the story of how I stopped trying to earn what should have been freely given. This is the story of how I built something from nothing, something that couldn't be taken away because it was never given in the first place. This is the story of Christmas Eve and what came after that, and how a family that tried to cut me off discovered that you can't actually sever what was never truly connected. It was Christmas Eve. The living room looked the way it always did, fireplace crackling with logs that had been positioned for optimal visual effect. Tree twinkling with ornaments collected over 3 decades of careful curation, the smell of my mother's mulled wine filling the house like a promise she never quite kept. The wine was always more cinnamon than warmth, more appearance than comfort. Like everything in that house, it was designed to be seen rather than felt. From the outside, it looked like the kind of Christmas people put on greeting cards. The kind that made strangers driving past slow down slightly, imagining the warmth within, the laughter, the love that must surely fill such a beautifully decorated space. I knew because I'd been that stranger once, looking at other people's windows, wondering what it felt like to be inside. From the inside, it was the last Christmas I would ever spend trying to earn a place at that table. I arrived at 6 as requested. The invitation, because that's what it was, an invitation to my own family's home, never an assumption of welcome, had specified 6 sharp, dinner at 7. My father, Gerald Townsend, believed that punctuality was a moral virtue, that arriving early showed desperation and arriving late showed disrespect. I had learned to arrive exactly on time to the minute to avoid either interpretation. I wore a dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Forest green, modest neckline, expensive enough to show I'd made an effort but not so expensive as to suggest I was spending frivolously. I'd learned these calculations too, the constant mathematics of approval seeking, how to present myself as successful but not boastful, ambitious but not threatening, independent but not so independent that I didn't need them. My mother, Patricia, opened the door. She kissed my cheek without quite meeting my eyes the way she always did and took my coat with the efficiency of a hotel concierge. "You're wearing green," she said, not a compliment, not a criticism. Just an observation, as if my clothing choice were weather. "Christmas color," I said, trying for lightness. "Michaela's wearing red," she replied, and I understood we were not to match. We were never to appear coordinated, as if similarity might suggest alliance. My mother had spent years ensuring that my sister and I occupied different territories, different roles, different colors. It was how she managed us. Divide and display. The living room was exactly as I expected. My father sat at the head of the table, not the dining table which was set in the next room, but the coffee table in the living room which he used as a secondary command center. He sat the way he always sat, back straight, shoulders squared, occupying space as if he had never once questioned whether he deserved the position he held. And why would he? Gerald Townsend had never been denied anything in his life. Not respect, not opportunity, not the automatic assumption of his own competence. He was reading something on his tablet or pretending to. The screen was angled away from me and he didn't look up when I entered. This too was performance, the busy patriarch, the man with important matters requiring his attention even on Christmas Eve. I was meant to wait, to hover, to feel the weight of his inattention until he chose to acknowledge me. I chose the armchair near the fire, not too close to my father's position but not so far as to seem withdrawn. There was a geometry to these gatherings, an invisible architecture of proximity and distance that I had studied for years. Sit too close to Dad and you appeared eager, too far and you appeared resentful. The sweet spot was approximately 8 feet, close enough to be included in conversation but not so close as to seem demanding of it. My mother retreated to the kitchen where I could hear her checking on things that didn't need checking. The mulled wine was already prepared, the turkey was already in the oven. But she needed occupation, needed to be busy with tasks that prevented her from having to sit in the room with us, from having to witness what was about to happen. I knew something was wrong, I always knew, though I could never identify how. Perhaps it was the way my mother's hands shook slightly as she took my coat. Perhaps it was the particular quality of my father's silence, not the comfortable silence of a man at ease but the loaded silence of a man rehearsing. Perhaps it was simply that I had spent 28 years in this house, learning to read the weather of my family's moods, and I could sense the storm coming the way animals sense earthquakes. Michaela arrived at 6:20, 20 minutes late, which was her privilege as the favored child. She swept in wearing exactly the shade of red my mother had mentioned, a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and carrying herself with the particular confidence of someone who has never doubted her welcome. She kissed our father's cheek and he looked up from his tablet and he smiled. That smile, I had seen it directed at me perhaps 3 times in my life. It transformed his face, softened the angles, suggested a warmth that his usual expression kept carefully banked. He reserved it for Michaela, for my brother Marcus when he visited, for business associates who had proven their value. I had learned not to want it, or tried to learn, or at least learned to hide how much I wanted it. "You're glowing," my father said to Michaela, and I saw it then, the diamond bracelet catching the firelight as she moved her wrist. A Christmas gift, clearly given early. She kept moving her wrist, angling it so the light would catch so we would all see what she had received. "Do you like it?" she asked, though it wasn't a question. "Daddy gave it to me this afternoon for being such a help with the Henderson account this year." The Henderson account. I knew of it vaguely, a significant client for my father's law firm, the kind of relationship that required cultivation and maintenance. Michaela had joined the firm 3 years ago, straight from her MBA, and had been positioned as Dad's protégé, his successor, the child who would carry on the Townsend legacy. I was the other child. The one who had gone to culinary school instead of law school, who worked in restaurants instead of offices, who represented the road not taken and therefore the road that must be judged. "It's beautiful," I said, because I was expected to say something. Michaela looked at me then, really looked, and I saw the assessment in her eyes. The quick inventory of my dress, my hair, my shoes, the calculation of whether I presented competition or contrast. "Green," she said. "How traditional." "Michaela," my mother called from the kitchen, "come help me with the wine." And my sister went, not because help was needed but because she had been summoned, because our mother needed her out of the room for reasons I would understand only later. I sat alone with my father and the fire and the weight of something unspoken pressing down on all of us. At 6:45 the doorbell rang. My father stood immediately, smoothing his jacket, and I felt the first real spike of alarm. We were not expecting anyone. Christmas Eve was family only, a rule my father enforced with the rigidity of religious doctrine. No friends, no colleagues, no interruptions. The appearance of an outsider at this sacred time meant something significant, something planned. My mother emerged from the kitchen, her face carefully blank. Michaela followed, and I saw it then, the smirk she couldn't quite suppress, the excitement barely contained. They knew, whatever this was, they knew. My father opened the door to Ernest Holloway, our family lawyer. Ernest was 60-ish, gray-haired, with the permanently uncomfortable expression of a man who had spent his career delivering bad news. He had drawn up my parents' wills, handled my father's business contracts, overseen the family trusts. I had seen him perhaps a dozen times in my life, always at my father's office, never in our home. "Ernest," my father said, shaking his hand with the gravity of state occasion. "Thank you for coming, please come in." Ernest entered, carrying a leather portfolio, and his eyes found me immediately. There was something in his expression, pity, perhaps, or discomfort, or professional detachment struggling with human feeling. He looked away quickly, focusing on my father, and I felt my stomach clench with certainty. Whatever was in that portfolio concerned me. Patricia, Michaela, my father said, please sit. We arranged ourselves according to unspoken rules. My father resumed his position at the head of the coffee table. My mother took her leather chair, the one she always sat in, holding her wine glass with both hands, not drinking, just holding, as if the stem might anchor her to something, might keep her from floating away on the tide of what was coming. Michaela perched on the arm of my mother's chair, her bracelet catching the light with every small movement. She had positioned herself perfectly, close to our mother, slightly above the rest of us, allied with the seat of feminine power in our family. Ernest sat at the end of the table, slightly apart, as if already trying to distance himself from what he was about to witness. I remained in my armchair on the outside of this arrangement, and I understood with horrible clarity that my position was symbolic. I had always been on the outside. Tonight they were simply making it official. My father cleared his throat. The sound cut through the room like a knife through wrapping paper, sharp and final and irreversible. He reached into his jacket. His movements were deliberate, rehearsed, the gestures of a man who had imagined this moment many times. He withdrew a document, heavy cream paper, legal formatting visible even from where I sat, and slid it across the oak table toward me. I won't be attending your wedding, Tori, he said. No, wait, the words didn't make sense. I wasn't engaged. I wasn't even dating anyone seriously. The last man I'd brought home 2 years ago had been dismissed by my father as unsuitable after a 20-minute conversation, and I had stopped trying after that. What wedding? What was he talking about? I've thought about this for a long time, he continued, his voice carrying the particular calmness of a man who had rehearsed this, who had prepared his arguments and his justifications until they felt like truth. I will not walk another man's daughter down the aisle. Another man's daughter. The phrase landed like a physical blow. I wasn't his daughter, that's what he was saying, not anymore. Whatever claim I had to that title, to that relationship, to that place in his life and his heart, he was revoking it. I was being transferred, reassigned, removed from the ledger of his affections. He gestured at the document. I'm cutting you out of the will completely. The fireplace kept crackling. The tree kept twinkling, as if nothing had happened. As if the floor hadn't just opened beneath my feet, as if I wasn't falling through the carefully constructed floor of my life, as if the past 28 years weren't suddenly revealed as a performance I had been giving to an audience that had already left the theater. I looked down at the paper, a legal document dense with language I'd need to read 3 times to understand. My name, Victoria Anne Townsend, appearing in clauses of removal and revocation. Gerald Townsend's name in the header, declaring his intentions with legal precision. Ernest's signature as witness, confirming that this had been done properly according to law with all necessary formalities observed. It was real. It was happening. This wasn't a nightmare I would wake from. This was my father's Christmas gift to me, wrapped in legal terminology and delivered with the firelight dancing on the walls. Then I looked up. My mother stared into her wine glass, not at me. Into her wine glass, as if the dark red liquid contained answers or explanations, or at least a refuge from having to witness what her husband was doing to her daughter. She had known. Of course she had known. The trembling hands, the summons to Michaela, the careful avoidance of my eyes, all of it preparation for this moment, this excision, this surgical removal of me from the family body. It's for the best, dear, she said quietly, still not looking up. You've made your choices, we've made ours. Choices, the word echoed in the space between us. What choices? The choice to go to culinary school instead of law school. The choice to work in restaurants instead of offices. The choice to want something different from what they wanted for me. When had those choices become crimes? When had my desire to build something of my own become a betrayal so complete that it required this public execution, this legal erasure? Michaela's smile had been growing since the moment our father pulled out the document. It wasn't happiness, exactly. It was victory. The smirk of a woman who had spent her whole life competing with me and was only now, in this moment, certain she'd won. The inheritance that would have been split 2 ways would now be hers alone. The favor that had been divided would now be concentrated, undiluted, absolute. Don't be dramatic, Gerald, she said, and the use of my chosen name, deliberate, mocking, told me everything about how she saw this. She was claiming the territory of our father's approval, marking it with her terminology, her version of reality. You knew this was coming. Had I known, I thought of all the warning signs I had dismissed, all the moments of coldness I had explained away, all the times I had told myself that love was present even when it wasn't visible. Had some part of me understood that this was the destination, that every step I took away from their expectations was a step toward this precipice? I folded the paper carefully. My hands trembled slightly. I let them. I would not hide my reaction. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble, but I would not pretend that this didn't hurt. It did hurt. It hurt more than I had imagined anything could hurt, a deep boneache of rejection that made my eyes burn and my throat tight. But beneath the hurt, something else was stirring, something that felt almost like relief. The terrible relief of finally knowing, of having the question answered, of being released from the exhausting labor of trying to earn what was now definitively unavailable. I stood, smoothed my dress. My choices, I said calmly, and my voice surprised me with its steadiness. You mean starting my own business instead of joining the family company? A bakery, my father said. Like the word itself was an embarrassment, a childish fancy, a phase I should have outgrown. Cupcakes? They're not just cupcakes, Dad. But even as I said it, I heard how futile it was. He would never understand. He had never tried to understand. The bakery, my dream, my plan, my future was just cupcakes to him, just nonsense, just proof of my fundamental unseriousness, my failure to be the daughter he wanted. Michaela stood up, her bracelet flashing. What's that supposed to mean? She demanded, as if I had threatened her, as if my calm response to being disinherited was somehow an attack on her victory. I looked at her for a long moment. At my sister, who had watched this happen and smiled, who had accepted her diamond bracelet and her secure position and her father's approval and felt no obligation to the sister who was being cast out, who had, perhaps, actively worked toward this moment, contributing her own small cruelties over the years to ensure that I would end up here, outside, looking in. Then I looked at my father. At the man who had just told me in front of witnesses that I was no longer his daughter in any meaningful sense. Who had prepared this document, planned this meeting, chosen Christmas Eve as the appropriate occasion for my elimination from the family. Then I looked at my mother, who still hadn't looked up from her wine glass, who had allowed this to happen, who had prepared the stage and summoned the audience and was now refusing to witness the climax of the drama she had helped create. I walked to the coat rack, put on my jacket. The wool felt scratchy against my neck. Or maybe it was the lump forming in my throat, the tears I was refusing to shed, the grief and rage and terrible, terrible clarity that were all trying to escape at once. I reached the door. Where are you going? Dad demanded, and there was something in his voice, surprise perhaps, or irritation, that I wasn't following the script, wasn't begging or crying or fighting in the way that would confirm his righteousness. We haven't even had dinner yet. I've lost my appetite, I said. Then I paused with my hand on the door. You know what's funny? I said, and I wasn't asking, I was stating, I was offering the observation that had crystallized in the moment of my departure. You think you've punished me, you think you've taken something away, but all you've really done is give me permission. Permission for what? Michaela asked, but she sounded uncertain now, her victory suddenly less certain. To stop trying, I said, to stop waiting, to stop measuring myself by standards that were never meant to include me in the first place. I looked at my father one last time. Merry Christmas, I said, good luck. Something tells me you're going to need it. The door closed behind me with a satisfying thud. Outside, snow was falling softly, the large flakes that come when the temperature is just right, transforming the world into something quiet and beautiful and new. I walked to my car on autopilot, my body knowing the way even as my mind reeled. Got in, sat there for a full minute, watching the snow accumulate on the windshield, feeling the cold seep in around the edges of my consciousness. Then I called Natasha. It's done, I said, and my voice was strange in my own ears, hollow and full at the same time. They did exactly what we expected. A pause on the other end. Natasha had been my best friend since college, the person who had seen me through every crisis, every doubt, every late-night phone call when the weight of my family's disapproval became too heavy to carry alone. She had known this was coming. We had discussed it, theorized about it, prepared for it in the abstract way you prepare for disasters you don't really believe will happen. Are you okay? She asked. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, red-rimmed eyes, jaw set. A face I barely recognized because it was finally fully my own. No, I said honestly, but I will be, because I had a secret, and now it was time to use it. 3 months earlier, Natasha and I had driven out to Pembroke Lake on a Thursday afternoon in late September. The summer heat had broken, leaving behind the particular golden quality of early autumn in New England, when the light seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, illuminating the world with a softness that makes everything look like a painting. I had told Natasha I needed to show her something. I hadn't told her what. The secrecy felt necessary, protective, as if speaking about it might somehow alert my family to what I had discovered. In retrospect, I understand that I was already preparing for the worst, already building the escape route that I would need when the bridge finally burned. The directions took us down a winding road lined with birch trees that had turned gold at the edges, their white bark glowing against the autumn foliage. We passed through a small town, one general store, one post office, one diner that advertised home cooking in faded letters, and then the road narrowed, became dirt, became something that felt like a path to a secret. And then there it was. A lakefront vacation house, white and clean against the water, a dock extending over the still surface like a pointing finger. The house sat on 2 acres of land, mostly lawn sloping gently down to the water, with a boathouse and a small beach and trees that had been carefully positioned to provide privacy without blocking the view. It was beautiful, it had always been beautiful, but I was seeing it with new eyes, understanding for the first time what it represented, what it could become. And they seriously forgot this was in your name, Natasha said, stepping out of the car slowly, her eyes wide as she took in the property. Dad put it in my name 5 years ago, I said. Tax purposes, he said. Something about estate planning, avoiding probate, I don't know. I signed the papers without really reading them. I was 23, just out of college, grateful that he was finally including me in something. Natasha walked to the edge of the lawn and looked out at the water. The lake was calm, mirror-still, reflecting the blue sky and the turning trees with perfect fidelity. A few houses were visible across the water, but they were distant, anonymous, part of the scenery rather than the community. Gerald, she said quietly, do you know what this is worth? I pulled out my phone and showed her the realtor's estimate. I had contacted 3 different agents, explained that I was considering selling a family property, asked for market valuations. The numbers they had provided ranged from high to higher, all of them representing more money than I had ever seen in my life. Natasha stared at the screen for a long time. Then she looked at me and I saw the calculation happening in her eyes, the same calculation I had made weeks earlier when I first understood what I possessed. That's enough to open the bakery, she said. And then some, the down payment, the equipment, first year's rent, everything. I had done the math so many times in so many variations. I could even hire staff from the beginning instead of trying to do everything myself. I could do it right. She shook her head slowly, still looking at the house, the water, the possibilities spreading out before us like the lake itself. Your family funded your freedom and they don't even know it. Inside, the house was frozen in time. Pine furniture that had been fashionable 15 years ago, nautical decorations, ship wheels, anchor motifs, prints of lighthouses that spoke to a vision of lakeside living that no one in my family actually practiced. A shelf of board games no one had touched in years, Monopoly, Scrabble, a jigsaw puzzle of a lighthouse that had never been completed. I ran my hand along the kitchen counter, feeling the dust that had accumulated, and thought about the last time we'd all been here together. Marcus had burned the burgers on the outdoor grill, turning them into charcoal bricks that he had tried to pass off as Cajun style. Dad had laughed about it, actually laughed, the sound carrying across the lawn as if happiness were easy, as if this family knew how to be joyful together. Mom had made a salad and put on music, something soft and classical, background noise to fill the silence. Michaela had complained about the mosquitoes, about the heat, about having to spend her summer vacation with her family instead of her friends. And I had sat on the dock alone and watched the light change on the water. Even in happy memories, I was slightly apart, always slightly apart. Not unhappy exactly, but observing the happiness of others from a distance, wondering what it would feel like to be fully inside the moment rather than watching it from the outside. Walk me through the plan again, Natasha said, flopping onto the dusty couch, raising a small cloud that caught the afternoon light. I sat across from her, pulling my knees to my chest, feeling the familiar excitement and terror of articulating the dream that had been growing in secret. I sell the house, use the money to open Dreamweaver. Still think that name is a bit much. It's perfect, shut up. I threw a throw pillow at her, releasing some of the tension that had been building since we arrived. I open the bakery. I build it and I wait. Wait for what? I looked around the room. At the family photos on the mantel, my parents young and smiling, my brother's graduation, Michaela's wedding that had never happened, engagement broken, no explanation given. At the umbrella stand by the door that still held a child-sized pink umbrella, mine from when I was 8, the last time I had been here as a child. For them to need something from me, I said quietly. Because they always do, eventually. Natasha was quiet for a moment, studying me with the intensity that had made her such a good friend and such a challenging mirror. That's dark, Gerald. It's realistic. I stood up, moved to the window, looked out at the water. My father's business runs on relationships, on his network, his reputation, his ability to make people feel important. But he doesn't build systems, he doesn't create structures that can survive without him, and Marcus is good at following rules, not at innovating. Michaela is ambitious but not strategic. She wants to win, but she doesn't understand that winning requires more than wanting it. I turned back to face her. Something will happen, the market will shift, or a key client will leave, or Dad will make a mistake that his charm can't fix. And when that happens, they'll remember that they have this asset, this property, and they'll come to me expecting to use it as collateral or to sell it to cover losses. And I'll say, "You'll say it's already gone," Natasha finished. "I'll say I used it to build something they told me was impossible. I'll say I took their cupcakes and turned them into a business while they weren't looking." Natasha stood up, crossed the room, took my hands. "And if they don't fall? If the business keeps going, if nothing goes wrong?" I squeezed her hands, grateful for the question, for the chance to articulate the other possibility. "Then I have a bakery. A successful bakery that I built myself without their help or approval. That's not a bad outcome either." We stayed at the lake house for another hour, exploring, imagining, planning. Natasha walked the perimeter of the property, noting the condition of the boathouse, the dock, the landscaping. I stood in the master bedroom, my parents' room, though they hadn't slept here in years, and felt the weight of what I was considering. This was betrayal, in a sense. Using a family asset for my own purposes without consultation or permission. The house was legally mine, but it was morally ambiguous, a trust I had been given for safekeeping that I was planning to convert into personal ambition. But I thought of my father's words, his constant refrains: "Dreams don't pay bills. If you're serious, figure it out yourself. I can't respect you the way I respect Marcus." He had told me to figure it out myself. So I would use the one resource he had inadvertently provided, the one thread of connection that he had forgotten or dismissed, and I would weave it into something that couldn't be ignored. That night, back in my apartment, a small one-bedroom in a neighborhood my parents considered transitional, I sat at my kitchen table with the property documents spread out in front of me and the realtor's estimates beside them. And I cried, not from sadness, from the particular grief of recognizing that a door is actually closed. That the family you wanted, the one where your father shows up for you, where your success is celebrated instead of mocked, where your choices are respected even when they're not understood, that family was never coming. The sooner you stop waiting for it, the sooner you can build something real. I wiped my face, picked up the phone, called the realtor with the highest estimate, the one who had seemed most professional, most discreet. "Miss Townsend," she had said when I introduced myself, "I'm glad you called. Lakefront property is moving quickly this fall. I think we can get you an excellent price." "How quickly?" I asked. "If we list next week." 6 weeks, maybe less. Cash buyers are looking for properties like this. 6 weeks. By Thanksgiving, it could be done. By Christmas, the money would be in my account, the transaction complete, the secret secured. "List it," I said. "And please, discretion is essential. My family doesn't know I'm doing this." There was a pause on the other end. I imagined her reassessing me, wondering about the family drama she was being drawn into, calculating whether the commission was worth the complications. "I understand," she said finally. "I'll handle everything personally." The house sold in 5 weeks, not 6. A cash offer from a couple looking for a weekend retreat, willing to pay above asking to avoid a bidding war. The morning the wire transfer cleared, I sat in my car outside the bank and stared at my account balance for a full minute. More money than I had ever seen in my life, all of it legal, all of it mine. And none of it, I knew, would matter if I didn't use it well. The money was potential, possibility, the seed of something that could grow or could be wasted. The real work was just beginning. "You're really doing this," Brett said over coffee the next morning, reading through my business plan with the intensity he usually reserved for recipe development. He was my friend from culinary school, the one who had watched me develop recipes for 3 years while working doubles at a diner, the one who had tasted every variation of my lavender honey cake until we got it exactly right. "I have to do it now," I said, "before they find out, before Christmas, definitely. If Dad learns I sold the lake house, he'll—" I trailed off, not sure what he would do. Disown me? He had just done that formally, legally. But there were degrees of separation, and I suspected that using the property without consultation would provoke a reaction beyond even what I had experienced on Christmas Eve. Brett looked up from the papers, his expression serious. "I'll admit, when you first mentioned it, I thought you were just venting. Everyone talks about opening their own place, but actually doing it?" He shook his head. "It takes more than money, Gerald. It takes everything. I know, you'll be working harder than you ever have, longer hours, more stress, no guarantee of success. Most restaurants fail in the first year. Most bakeries don't make it to year 2. I know." He studied me for a moment, seeing something in my face that made him nod slowly. "People always underestimate you," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "People always underestimate me," I agreed. I pushed a small plate toward him. On it sat a perfect slice of my lavender honey cake, the one we had perfected together, the one that had become my signature. The crumb was tender, the flavor complex, floral but not perfumed, sweet but not cloying, with a depth that came from local honey and careful technique. Brett took a bite, closed his eyes, was quiet for a moment. When he opened them, I saw the decision in his face. "Gerald, I know, I know." He set down his fork, leaned forward, his voice dropping to the intensity he used when discussing things that mattered. "You're definitely doing this. And I'm definitely helping. I'll consult on the kitchen design, help you find equipment, train your staff if you need it. But Gerald," he waited until I met his eyes, "don't do this to prove them wrong, do this because it's what you want. Because proving them wrong is a motivation that runs out, but building something real that keeps going." I thought about that advice in the months that followed as the bakery took shape from dream to reality. Brett was right, of course. The anger that fueled my initial decisions, the rage at my father's dismissal, the determination to show him that I was serious, that I could succeed, was powerful but finite. It burned hot and bright, and then, inevitably, it burned out, leaving behind the question, what now? What came after the anger was harder. What came after was the daily reality of building a business, and that reality was nothing like the fantasy I had carried for years. Here's the part of the story nobody tells you, the part between signing the lease and standing in front of something you built. The part that looks from the outside like just getting started, but feels from the inside like being buried alive and having to claw your way up inch by inch. I found the location in late November, a corner space in a neighborhood that was transitioning from industrial to residential, filled with young professionals and families who valued quality over convenience. The rent was high but not impossible, the space was raw but full of potential, and the landlord, a retired contractor named Joe who had grown up in the neighborhood, was willing to work with me on build-out terms. "You're young," he said when we met to discuss the lease. "And you're a woman, and you're opening a bakery, which everyone knows is a tough business, but you've got a look in your eye like you know what you're getting into. So I'll give you 6 months rent-free for build-out, and I'll help you find contractors who won't cheat you." "Why?" I asked, suspicious of kindness that came without clear motivation. Joe shrugged. "My daughter tried to open a restaurant 5 years ago, couldn't get financing, couldn't find a landlord who would take a chance on her. She gave up, went back to corporate work, hates every minute of it. So I'm thinking, maybe if someone had helped her, things would be different. Maybe helping you is like helping her in a way." That was the first lesson of the build phase. Help comes from unexpected places, from people who see themselves in your struggle, who understand that success isn't a zero-sum game where their loss is required for your gain. The contractors started in early December, while I was still navigating the aftermath of Christmas Eve, still processing the formal severance from my family. I threw myself into the construction with the desperation of someone trying to outrun grief, showing up every morning at 6 to review plans, staying until midnight to sweep floors and imagine the finished space. The Dream Weaver Bakery and Café, I had fought for that name. Brett had called it a bit much, my realtor had suggested something more approachable, and I had insisted. The name came from a childhood memory, from the nights when I couldn't sleep and my grandmother would tell me stories about the dream weaver, a magical figure who collected dreams and wove them into tapestries that became real. Your dreams are threads, she would say. You have to weave them yourself, but the material is yours. No one can take that away. She had been the only one who encouraged my baking, who tasted my early experiments without grimacing, who told me that creating food for people was a sacred act, a form of love and nourishment that mattered as much as any profession. She died when I was 16, but her voice stayed with me, and the bakery was my tribute to her vision of what I could become. The contractors finished in early February after 6 weeks of dust and noise and decisions that seemed impossibly consequential at the time. What color tile? What style of lighting? How should the display cases be arranged? And now, looking back, seem like details in service of a larger whole. The day we installed the sign, I stood across the street in the cold and watched the gold letters catch the winter sun. The Dream Weaver Bakery and Café, my dream, my name, my rules. I cried a little. Natasha, who had come to witness the moment, pretended not to notice. Don't make it weird, she said, but her voice was thick too. I'm not making it weird. You're definitely making it weird. I laughed and wiped my face, and we went inside to begin the work of stocking, organizing, preparing for opening day. The first week, we had 40 customers. The second week, 60. I had hired 2 staff members, Maya, a culinary school graduate with more talent than confidence, and James, a retired firefighter who wanted to learn baking and had the work ethic of someone who understood that lives depended on his attention to detail. We opened at 7, closed at 4, and I spent the hours between closing and midnight doing paperwork, planning menus, worrying about cash flow. And then, the review. A local food blogger named Sarah Chen came in on a Tuesday, ordered the lavender honey cake and the cardamom croissant, and posted about it that evening. Her blog, Hartford Eats, had a modest but dedicated following, and her writing style was passionate without being pretentious, critical without being cruel. Her post went live at 8 p.m. By 9, we had 20 comments asking for the address. By Friday, there was a line out the door for 2 weeks. We sold out of everything by noon. I had to hire 2 additional staff members just to handle the register. Maya discovered reserves of confidence she didn't know she had, taking charge of the kitchen with an authority that emerged under pressure. James worked the front of house with the calm competence of his former profession, managing the line, explaining the menu, making every customer feel welcome even when we were overwhelmed. I thought, this is it. This is what it feels like. The success I had imagined, the validation I had craved, the proof that I had been right to believe in myself when no one else did. It was happening. The Dream Weaver was real, and it was working, and nothing could stop me now. And then March hit. The espresso machine broke on a Monday morning, right in the middle of the rush. The diagnosis: a cracked boiler, replacement parts $800, and a 2-week wait because the manufacturer was backordered. I spent that day explaining to disappointed customers that we had coffee but no espresso, watching sales drop by 30%, calculating how much revenue we were losing with every hour of downtime. A pipe burst in the prep kitchen on Wednesday. Emergency plumber. Closed for 3 days while we repaired the damage, replaced the flooring, dealt with the health inspector to ensure we could reopen safely. 3 days of rent, payroll, and fixed costs with no revenue to offset them. One of my 2 new employees quit on Friday, no notice, just didn't show up during what would have been our busiest week if we had been fully operational. I spent that weekend working double shifts, sleeping 4 hours, waking to find that I had burned the first batch of croissants because I was too exhausted to focus. And on the Sunday night of that same week, after closing alone, after mopping the floor myself, after running the numbers and realizing that 3 days closed plus the plumber plus the espresso machine repair had put me $4,000 in the red for the month, I sat down on the floor of my own bakery. Back against the display case. Legs stretched out on the tile I had personally chosen, the blue-gray that reminded me of Pembroke Lake in early morning. The lights were off except for the security lamp in the back, casting long shadows across the empty space. And I thought very clearly maybe they were right. That thought sat in the room with me for a few minutes. I let it, because running from hard thoughts doesn't make them go away. It just makes them faster, more persistent, more able to ambush you when your defenses are down. Maybe my father was right. Maybe this was foolish, a waste of my education, a child's dream that couldn't survive contact with adult reality. Maybe Michaela's smirk had been justified, maybe my mother's silence had been wisdom rather than cowardice. Maybe the bakery was just cupcakes, just a phase, just proof of my fundamental unseriousness. I took out my phone. Scrolled to a text my father had sent me 2 years earlier when I'd first mentioned the bakery idea seriously. I had kept it perversely as motivation, as a reminder of what I was fighting against. This is why I can't respect you the way I respect Marcus. You refuse to be serious. I read it once, then I got up, washed my hands in the prep sink, the water cold and shocking against my skin. Pulled out my notebook, the one where I kept recipes, ideas, plans for the future. And I started planning the April menu, because he was wrong. Not because I was succeeding. Success was temporary, fragile, subject to the whims of machinery and weather and employee reliability. He was wrong because the attempt mattered, because building something, even if it failed, was more serious than never trying at all, because serious didn't mean profitable or prestigious or approved by Gerald Townsend. Serious meant showing up. Meant doing the work even when the work was hard. Meant getting up off the floor literally and figuratively and trying again. The April menu featured rhubarb tarts, lemon lavender scones, a honey cake variation with blood orange. I planned a Mother's Day brunch special, a collaboration with a local coffee roaster, a bread-making workshop that would bring in additional revenue on slow afternoons. I planned and I worked and I survived March. April came, May came. By June, I had hired 2 new staff members to replace the one who had quit, and I had implemented systems, checklists, schedules, cross-training that would prevent me from being quite so vulnerable to individual failures. By August, I had paid back the March deficit and built a small cushion of savings. By October, the bakery had been featured in Hartford Magazine, a full-page spread with photographs of the space, interviews with me and Maya, a glowing review that called us the neighborhood's best-kept secret, though not for long. Brett called me the morning the issue came out. "Not bad for a girl who just makes cupcakes," he said, quoting my father's dismissal. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone, laughed until tears came, until Maya poked her head out of the kitchen to make sure I was okay. While I was building, my family was quietly unraveling. I didn't orchestrate it. I didn't need to. The thing about a family held together by image is that image requires constant maintenance. The moment someone stops maintaining it, the whole structure starts to lean. My father's law firm, Townsend and Associates, had been founded by my grandfather in 1965. It had grown from a one-man practice to a mid-sized firm with 12 attorneys, specializing in corporate law, real estate, and estate planning. Gerald Townsend had built his reputation on relationships, on the golf course deals, the dinner party connections, the personal touch that made clients feel like family. What he had never built was a foundation that could survive without him at the center of it. The legal industry was changing. Technology was automating research that had once required teams of junior associates. Clients were demanding flat fees and predictable costs instead of the billable hour model that had sustained firms for decades. Young lawyers were leaving big firms to start boutique practices, taking clients with them, offering specialized expertise at lower overhead. My father saw these changes but didn't adapt to them. He continued to operate as he always had, confident that his relationships, his reputation, his personal charm would carry him through as they always had. He didn't invest in technology, he didn't develop new practice areas, he didn't mentor the next generation of partners in a way that would ensure their loyalty to the firm rather than to him personally. When 2 of his longest partners retired within the same year, both men in their 60s who had decided that the changing landscape wasn't worth the fight, the firm began to bleed. Their clients, who had stayed for the relationships rather than the firm brand, followed them into retirement or took their business elsewhere. The real estate market shifted in ways my father hadn't anticipated, drying up the transaction work that had been a reliable revenue stream. I learned about this gradually through fragments of information that reached me through mutual acquaintances, through industry gossip, through the occasional mention in local business news. I didn't seek it out. I told myself I wasn't interested, that my family had made their choices and I had made mine, that their troubles were no longer my concern. But I paid attention. I couldn't help but pay attention. Michaela called me in November, 11 months after the Christmas Eve disinheritance. I almost didn't answer. The number was familiar but not saved, and I stared at it for 3 rings, debating whether to let it go to voicemail. But I was standing in my bakery kitchen at 6 in the morning, kneading dough for the day's croissants, and curiosity, that dangerous, persistent thing, won. "Gerald," she said, her voice was different. Not the sugary sweetness she used when our father was listening, not the smirk in her voice when she said you knew this was coming, just thin, like something stretched too far, like a wire about to snap. "Michaela," I said carefully. "How are you?" "I'm good," I said, though the automatic response felt strange. Was I good? I was tired, always tired, but also satisfied in a way I had never been before. The bakery was succeeding. I had built something. I was good, or close enough. A pause on the other end. I could hear background noise, traffic maybe, or an office. She wasn't at home. "Dad's firm is in trouble," she said. "Real trouble. He's had to let people go. The office downtown, they're giving it up at the end of the year, moving to a smaller space, shared offices, something." I stopped kneading, the dough forgotten on the counter. "I'm sorry to hear that," was I. I examined the feeling, found it complicated. Not satisfaction exactly, not the vindication I might have expected. Just sadness, surprisingly. Sadness for what my father was experiencing, for the collapse of the empire he had built, for the fear and humiliation that must accompany such a public failure. But also, he had made his choices, we had made ours. "Mom had to get a job," Michaela continued. "At Henderson's, the department store. She's working in customer service, returns, and exchanges. She hates it, but they need the income. Dad's not dealing with it well. He's angry all the time, at everyone." I held the phone and looked at the kitchen I had built. The copper fixtures I had chosen after weeks of comparison shopping. The handwritten menu board that Maya updated every morning. The wall of photographs from the bakery's first year, staff parties, customer celebrations, the ordinary moments that made up a life. I thought about the Christmas table. The document slid across the oak surface, Ernest shifting uncomfortably in his seat, my mother staring into her wine glass. "What about you?" I asked. A longer pause. I heard her take a breath, let it out. "I had to leave the firm," she said quietly. "There wasn't enough work to justify my salary. Dad tried to keep me on, but the other partners, they voted me out. I'm looking for work, but it's hard. The market is flooded with lawyers, and I don't have a book of business. I don't have portable clients. She stopped. "I have nothing." Then, barely audible, "I was wondering if maybe I could come in, talk to you. About whether there's anything I could do at the bakery." I stood very still. The request was so unexpected, so opposite to everything I knew about my sister, that I couldn't process it immediately. Michaela, who had accepted a diamond bracelet while I was being disinherited. Michaela, who had smirked and said, "You knew this was coming." Michaela, who had spent her life competing with me and winning, now asking if she could wash dishes in my kitchen. "Come in Saturday morning," I said. 7 a.m. She arrived at 6:58. I watched her through the front window as she approached. No designer suit, dark jeans, practical shoes, a simple sweater. Hair pulled back in a ponytail instead of the elaborate styles she had favored. She looked younger somehow, without the armor of her usual presentation. Or maybe she looked like the person she'd always been underneath the version she performed for our father. She entered quietly, looking around the space with an expression I couldn't read. Not envy exactly, assessment perhaps, or simply seeing. "You're early," I said. I wasn't sure about parking. I handed her an apron, plain white, the same kind everyone wore. "You'll start on dishes," I said. "Everything else you learn from watching." She nodded once. No protest, no negotiation, no attempt to leverage her education or her former position, just acceptance. "Michaela," I said. She looked up, and I saw the fear in her eyes, the fear of humiliation, of failure, of having to start over in a world that had always handed her success. "I'm not doing this to humiliate you," she swallowed. "I know. I'm doing it because everyone deserves the chance to learn the right way, from the bottom up, to understand what they're managing before they manage it." She tied the apron strings, her fingers fumbling slightly. "I understand." And she went to work. I didn't watch her constantly. I had my own tasks, my own responsibilities, and I trusted Maya to supervise the dish station. But I checked in periodically, and what I saw surprised me. Michaela worked. Not with the resentful efficiency of someone who thought themselves above the task, but with the focused attention of someone who had discovered that pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. She asked questions about the equipment, about the procedures, about why we did things certain ways. She took correction without argument. She stayed late without being asked to finish the backlog that had built up during the day. 3 weeks after she started, I walked into the café section at 9 in the morning to find Gerald Townsend sitting at the corner table. He was looking at his hands. I stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment before he saw me. He looked older, not fragile exactly, but diminished. Like a man who had recently discovered that the things he'd believed were permanent were actually contingent. His suit was the same quality as always, but it hung differently, as if he had lost weight. His hair, always so carefully groomed, needed a trim. He looked up, found me. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he said, "I don't need charity." "I know," I said. "I'm not offering any." I walked over. Sat down across from him. The morning sun came through the front window and fell across the table between us, illuminating the dust motes in the air. "I have a position," I said. "Kitchen support. It's not glamorous. Early starts, physical work, minimum wage to start." His jaw tightened. "You want me to wash dishes?" "I want you to contribute," I said. "The same way everyone here contributes. You earn what you're worth. Nothing more, nothing less." He looked around the bakery. At the people coming through the door, the line forming at the counter, the gold lettering on the window that he had once told me represented a waste of a good education. At the staff moving with purpose and coordination, the systems working smoothly, the business functioning as a business. "You built this," he said quietly. It wasn't quite a question. "I built this," I confirmed. Another silence. I waited. I had learned in the months of running the bakery that silence was a tool, a space that others would fill if you gave them room. "I didn't think you would," he said finally. "I know." He looked at his hands again, the hands that had signed the document cutting me out of his life, that had slid it across the table with such certainty. "The vacation house," he said slowly. "You used it, didn't you?" It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "You put it in my name, it was legally mine." He nodded, not angrily, just absorbing it. Processing the information that I had acted without his knowledge, without his permission, using the one asset he had given me to escape the fate he had planned. "Smart," he said quietly. The word hung in the air between us. Approval of a sort, or at least acknowledgement. Not of my morality, but of my competence. He would have done the same, I realized. In my position, with my resources, facing my obstacles, he would have done exactly what I did. The recognition of this similarity was uncomfortable, suggesting connections I wasn't sure I wanted to acknowledge. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, a car passed slowly through the snow that had begun to fall. Inside, someone ordered a cardamom croissant and laughed at something James said at the register. "Why are you offering me this?" my father asked finally. I thought about the answer, the real one. Not the neat version, not the story I might tell later about forgiveness and growth, but the complicated truth of this moment. "Because you're my father," I said, "and because watching you fail doesn't actually feel the way I thought it would." He looked up. "How does it feel?" "Like nothing was proved," I said. "Like the only thing that matters is what gets built going forward." He was quiet for a long time. I watched him wrestle with whatever pride, whatever shame, whatever complicated mix of emotions had brought him here. I didn't rush him. I had time. The bakery had taught me that time was a resource like any other, to be invested wisely. Then he said, "What time do I start?" "Monday, 6 a.m. Don't be late," I said. He wasn't. Gerald Townsend was not a natural dishwasher. He was too slow at first, too careful, handling the commercial equipment like it might break, like he was unfamiliar with the concept of things that required maintenance. He approached the dishes with the same precision he had once applied to legal documents, examining each plate as if looking for precedent, stacking them with the gravity of arranging evidence. But he showed up. Every morning at 5:45, 15 minutes early, wearing clothes that grew progressively less formal as the weeks passed. The good watch disappeared after week 1, replaced by a simple digital timer. The pressed shirts gave way to t-shirts, then to the same plain white tees the rest of the kitchen staff wore. He learned to stack the racks correctly by the end of week 1. He learned the names of the staff by week 2, not just Michaela, but Maya and James and the new hires who had joined as we expanded our hours. He stopped arriving with the air of a visitor, a temporary presence, and started moving through the space like someone who belonged there. I watched him when I could, not to check up on him but to understand what was happening. My father, who had once commanded rooms, who had signed documents that determined futures, who had never once questioned his place at the head of any table, now working minimum wage in his daughter's bakery, and doing so with a humility I wouldn't have believed possible. One morning I came in early to find him and Michaela at the prep table, side by side. She was showing him how to properly score croissant dough before baking, demonstrating the technique with the authority of someone who had learned through repetition and failure. He was watching, listening, trying to replicate her movements with his own hands. She was teaching him. He was learning. I watched from the doorway for a moment, seeing the reversal of their former dynamic. Michaela, who had been positioned as his successor, his protégé, the child who would carry on his legacy, now instructing him in the basics of a trade he had once dismissed. And accepting the instruction not with resentment but with something that looked almost like gratitude, I went back to my office without interrupting. The work of repair I was learning was not dramatic. It was not marked by grand gestures or emotional speeches. It was marked by showing up day after day, doing the work that needed to be done, slowly building trust through action rather than promise. My father made mistakes. He broke a stack of plates in week 3, trying to move too quickly to prove himself. He argued with Maya about oven temperatures, citing common sense against her training, and had to apologize when the batch he insisted on baking came out burned. He had trouble taking direction from people he had once considered beneath his notice, and sometimes his frustration showed. But he kept showing up, and slowly, incrementally, he changed. 6 months after Michaela started, I called her into my office. She sat across from me, flour on her forearms, hair still pinned back, looking like someone who had learned through doing what work actually meant. The transformation was remarkable. The competitive edge that had defined her, the constant assessment of relative status, had softened into something more collaborative. She had become, genuinely, a valuable member of the team. "I need someone to manage the new location," I said. "Across town, opening in March," she blinked. "What?" "Someone who understands both the service side and the business side. Someone who's done every job in the building, who knows how the systems work, who can train staff because they've been trained themselves." I slid the contract across the desk. It was a real contract with real salary and benefits, with profit-sharing potential, with the title of general manager. "You've been here every morning before I arrive," I continued. "You've trained 2 new staff members. You solved the supplier issue in October without being asked. You handled the health inspector visit when I was out sick. You've earned this, the real way, through the work." She stared at the contract. Her hands trembled slightly. "Why?" she said, her voice cracking on the word. It was the same question my father had asked, and I gave her the same honesty. "Because you earned it," I said, "not because you're my sister. Not because of Christmas Eve or what came before or what I owe you, because of what you did day after day when no one was watching." She pressed her lips together, tears welled up, and she wiped them away quickly as if emotion were a weakness she couldn't afford. "Gerald, I know, I sat there while Dad, I know, I should have said something." "Yes," I agreed, "you should have." She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw the full weight of her regret. Not just for that night, but for years of competition, of comparison, of accepting the role our father had assigned her at my expense. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm genuinely sorry." I looked at her for a moment, my sister, who had grown up competing with me in a house that ran on comparison, who had won for years simply by being the one our father approved of, and who had shown up without complaint to wash dishes when everything else was gone. "I know," I said again, and this time it meant something different. It meant, "I see you, I see the work you've done, I see who you're becoming." I pushed the contract closer. "Sign it." She did. One afternoon, about a year after Gerald started, I passed by the dish station during the lunch rush. He was moving efficiently now, none of that early careful slowness. Stacking, rinsing, running the machine, keeping pace with the kitchen output. He had developed a rhythm, a flow, an understanding of how his work connected to everyone else's. He didn't see me watching. And I stood there for a moment, thinking about the man who had once sat at the head of a polished oak table and slid a document across it like a verdict. The man who had told me in front of witnesses that I was no longer his daughter, who had prepared that moment with legal precision and delivered it on Christmas Eve. This was the same man, different circumstances, different power dynamics, different understanding of what mattered. I thought about what I had expected to feel in this moment: vindication, I supposed, satisfaction, the clean, bright feeling of being proven right, of watching my detractors acknowledge my success, of finally receiving the approval I had craved for so long. What I actually felt was quieter than that, not forgiveness exactly, not yet. The hurt of that Christmas Eve was still there, would probably always be there, a scar that marked where I had been wounded, but something in that direction. The recognition that watching someone work, really work humbly, without complaint, is one of the more effective ways of seeing them clearly. My father had been wrong about many things, but he wasn't a monster. He was a man, flawed and limited, who had operated according to principles that had once served him well and had failed to adapt when the world changed. He had hurt me, deliberately and carelessly, and he was now experiencing consequences that had forced him to reconsider his assumptions. That wasn't redemption, it was just life with its complicated morality, its slow grinding of consequences, its occasional opportunities for change. I went back to my office, pulled up the plans for the third location, which was scheduled to open in 6 months. The Dream Weaver was becoming something I hadn't fully imagined, not just a bakery but a small empire, a proof of concept that could be replicated, a system that could survive without my constant attention. Brett appeared beside me. He had become a partner of sorts, consulting on expansion, helping develop training programs, ensuring that the quality that had made us successful could be maintained as we grew. "Not bad," he said, looking at the plans. "Not bad," I agreed. "You remember what your dad called it? In the beginning, cupcakes," I said. Brett laughed. I didn't, not because it wasn't funny, but because standing there I wasn't thinking about my father's opinion anymore. I was thinking about the girl who sat on a dock at the family vacation house and watched the light change on the water, always slightly apart, always slightly outside of it. Feeling the loneliness of the person who doesn't quite fit, who observes the happiness of others from a distance, who wonders what it would feel like to be fully inside the moment. She had taken that feeling, that particular loneliness, and turned it into something. A kitchen, a menu, a place where other people came to sit and feel less alone. The Dream Weaver, my dream, not inherited, built. Dream Weaver Enterprises opened its third location on a Wednesday in April, 2 years and 4 months after that Christmas Eve. Not a grand ceremony, no ribbon cutting, no press release, no attempt to turn the opening into a story about redemption or family reconciliation. Just the staff arriving at 6 in the morning, getting everything in place and opening the doors at 8. I stood outside on the pavement for a moment before going in. 3 stories, corner location, gold lettering catching the morning light. The original bakery had been cozy, intimate, a neighborhood spot. This was something else, a statement, a declaration that we had arrived, that the cupcakes had become an enterprise. Brett appeared beside me, coffee in hand. "Not bad," he said. "Not bad," I agreed. We went inside. The morning rush was steady, the systems working, the staff confident. I moved through the space, checking in, troubleshooting minor issues, but mostly just being present. This was the part of the work I had come to love, not the crisis management, but the ordinary maintenance of something that was working, the care of a creation that had taken on its own life. At noon, I took a break in the small office upstairs. Checked emails, reviewed numbers, planned the week ahead, the ordinary work of business ownership, no longer thrilling but satisfying in its own way. There was a knock on the door. "Come in." My father entered. He was wearing his work clothes, plain t-shirt, apron slung over his shoulder, the uniform of kitchen support, but he had something in his hand, an envelope. "Ernest asked me to give you this," he said, setting it on the desk. "He retired last month, said he couldn't in good conscience keep handling your family's legal matters after everything." I looked at the envelope. Heavy cream paper, legal formatting visible. My stomach tightened with an old reflex, the memory of another envelope, another document, another moment of formal severance. "You don't have to open it now," my father said. "I know, but I did open it because waiting wouldn't change the contents, because I had learned that facing things directly was usually better than anticipation. It was a new will. Not my father's. Ernest wouldn't have been involved in that anymore, but a document relating to the original disinheritance. A formal acknowledgement that the previous will had been executed under duress with improper notice, potentially contestable. A restoration of my legal status as heir if I wanted it. I read through the pages, the dense legal language that I now understood better than I had 2 years ago. Then I looked up at my father. Why? He sat down across from me, the movement of a man who had learned to take up less space, to wait for invitation rather than assuming position. Because I was wrong, he said, not just about the bakery, about everything. About what success looks like, about what matters, about you. He paused, gathering words. This was still hard for him, I could see. The admission of error didn't come naturally to a man who had built his life on certainty. I thought I was protecting you, he continued. Teaching you a lesson, showing you that the world wouldn't indulge your fantasies. I thought I was being a good father. Preparing you for reality. And now I understand that I was preparing you for my reality, not yours, and that your reality turned out to be more durable than mine. He gestured around us at the building, the business, the life I had built. You did this, not me, not despite me, really. I'd like to think I taught you something about hard work, even if I taught it badly. But you did this. And I was wrong to try to stop you, wrong to cut you off. Wrong to make you choose between our family and your dream. I set the document aside, looked at him, really looked at the man he had become through failure and work and time. I accept your apology, I said. But I don't need this. I touched the envelope. I don't need to be in your will. I don't need the money or the property or the legal recognition. I built what I have without it, and I value what I built more because of that. He nodded, not surprised. I thought you might say that. Ernest thought so too. That's why there's a second option. He pulled another envelope from his pocket. A new structure. A family foundation funded by the remaining assets, focused on supporting entrepreneurs, people with dreams that don't fit the standard patterns, who need help getting started. You would administer it or not, your choice. I took the second envelope, considered it. This was different, not restoration of old structures but creation of new ones, not inheritance but partnership. Not looking backward but forward. I'll think about it, I said. That's all I ask. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Gerald, yes, thank you for the job, for the chance, for, he struggled with the words. For showing me that there's more than one way to be serious, more than one way to build something that lasts. I watched him go, then turned to the window. Looked out at the street below, the people moving through their lives, the city continuing its endless cycle of destruction and creation. If I could go back to that Christmas Eve, to the girl standing at the door with her hand on the latch, wool scratchy at her neck, lump in her throat, I wouldn't change what she said. I wouldn't change anything. Because every single thing they did, the document, the disinheritance, the cold wine glass, the smirk, was the last push she needed to stop waiting for permission. 5 years after that Christmas Eve, I stood in the original Dreamweaver location, now designated as our flagship and training center, and watched a new class of employees learn to score croissant dough. Among them was a young woman, 22 years old, who had told me during her interview that her family didn't support her career choice. They wanted me to be a lawyer, she had said. Like my father, like my brother. They said baking was a hobby, not a profession. I had hired her on the spot. My father was in the back, managing the dish station with the efficiency he had developed over years of practice. He would retire soon, he had told me, not from work entirely but from full-time employment. He wanted to travel, to see the world beyond the office and the courtroom and the limited geography of his former life. But he would always have a place here if he wanted it. That was understood. Michaela was across town, running the second location, which had become our most profitable. She had developed her own style of management, different from mine but effective, and we had learned to be partners as well as sisters. Not close exactly, the damage of years couldn't be fully repaired, but functional, respectful. Sometimes even warm. My mother had retired from Henderson's after 2 years of customer service work. She volunteered now at a garden center, working with plants, finally finding something she enjoyed. We spoke occasionally, carefully, building a relationship that was new rather than restored, defined by who we were now rather than who we had been. Marcus, my brother, had emerged from the family collapse with his law career intact. He had always been more independent than the rest of us, less dependent on our father's firm. We were in touch sporadically, connected more by history than by present intimacy, but not estranged. And I was exactly where I wanted to be, not because I had proven them wrong, though I had, definitively, but because I had proven myself right. Because I had taken the threads of my own dreams, my own vision, my own stubborn belief that cupcakes could become something significant, and I had woven them into a reality. The Dream Weaver Foundation, which I had agreed to administer, had funded 17 new businesses in its first 3 years. Small operations, mostly food businesses, craft studios, service providers, run by people who had been told their dreams were impractical. We provided seed funding, mentorship, access to networks they couldn't otherwise reach. We didn't guarantee success, but we guaranteed opportunity. That was enough. Brett had opened his own restaurant, a small place specializing in seasonal tasting menus, and we collaborated regularly. Supplier sharing, cross-promotion, the kind of professional friendship that had replaced the intense bonds of our early years. He was married now with a daughter, and I was her godmother, a role I took with the seriousness it deserved. Natasha had moved to Chicago for a job opportunity, but we talked every week, and she visited monthly to restock her supply of lavender honey cake. She was the only one who had known the whole story from the beginning, who had witnessed the transformation from desperate plan to thriving reality, and her perspective kept me grounded. I walked through the bakery now, checking in with staff, tasting the day's offerings, making small adjustments to the display. This was my life, the ordinary maintenance of something extraordinary, the daily work of keeping a dream alive once it had been born. At closing, I sat at the corner table, the same one where my father had sat that first day, asking for work, and opened my laptop to review the foundation applications. A bakery in New Haven, run by a mother of 3 who had learned to bake during maternity leave and discovered a talent. A catering business in Hartford, started by a former corporate chef who wanted to focus on sustainable sourcing. A food truck in Bridgeport, serving the community that had raised its owner. So many dreams, so many weavers working with the threads they had been given, creating tapestries of their own design. I thought about the girl I had been, sitting on the dock at Pembroke Lake, watching the light change on the water, always slightly apart, always slightly outside, wondering what it would feel like to belong, to be accepted, to be enough. She had learned, finally, that belonging wasn't something you earned, it was something you built. That acceptance started with yourself, that enough was a decision, not a destination. The lights of the bakery glowed in the gathering dusk. The sign outside the Dreamweaver Bakery and Café caught the streetlight and threw it back gold against the dark. I closed my laptop, turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped out into the evening. Here's what I want you to take from this if you're still listening. They will tell you your dream is too small. They will tell you it doesn't pay bills. They will look at what you love and find the most dismissive word for it. Cupcakes, hobby, phase. Let them, because the people who have never had the courage to build anything from scratch, they will always underestimate what scratch can become. They will always confuse the starting point with the destination, the seed with the tree, the thread with the tapestry. Some legacies are inherited. Mine was built, one pastry at a time, one early morning at a time, one choice made in the quiet to keep going at a time, and I wouldn't trade a single one, not the failures, not the doubts. Not the Christmas Eve that broke my heart and set me free. Because that girl, standing at the door with her hand on the latch, wool scratchy at her neck, lump in her throat, she was about to become me. She was about to discover that the thing she feared most, being cut off, being alone, being forced to rely only on herself, was actually the gift she needed most. The disaster that struck Christmas Eve wasn't a disaster at all. It was a beginning, the first page of a story that I wrote myself with my own hands in my own words. And it continues. Every morning when I unlock the door and turn on the lights and start the coffee and prepare to weave another day of dreams into reality. The dream weaver is still weaving, and she always will be.